Welcome to the podcast of the Public Education Foundation.
I'm Dr. Mariama Grimes, Senior Advisor to the President of the Public Education Foundation, and I'm here with one of my favorite people, Dr. Liz City, Senior Lecturer at the Harvard Graduate School of Education and a member of our Leadership Institute faculty. Liz, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Mari.
Now, I have to be candid with our audience. Liz and I have a very close relationship as she was my advisor when I was a student at the EDLD program at Harvard. And during that time, she also served as the director of the EDLD program. Liz, I know you recently passed the baton on to a new director, so can you tell us about your exciting new project and role?
Sure. I'm currently the executive director of something called Reach Every Reader, which is a collaboration of the Harvard Graduate School of Education, MIT, and Florida State University to try to really tackle a persistent challenge in U.S. education, which is that we have a lot of kids who don't read very well in fourth grade. So we're tackling early literacy as something that we kind of know a lot about, but it's not translating into kids learning to read.
Okay, so what is the Institute doing? How are they going to approach that problem?
Well, we don't think we're actually any smarter than anybody else who's tried to solve this problem before, so we're going to try to tackle it a little bit differently and learn from both our own and others' failures as well as successes. And the way we're doing that is by addressing pre-K and trying to support pre-K children and their caregivers in developing some early literacy skills. We're also trying to develop a diagnostic screener for kindergartners that will make really good predictions about which kids are likely to struggle to read so that we can intervene early. We're also developing K-3 interventions to say, okay, what is it that kids need once we know they're struggling readers? What are the ways we can support them? And then, of course, we need to actually build the adults' capacity, whether that's teachers or parents or other caregivers, to support children well. So we're trying to figure out how do we do that in a way that actually helps adults change their behavior and support kids in learning to read.
Now, I know you just getting started. You're pretty new organization, but do you have any early results that you could share with us in terms of what you found?
Well, we're very early on, but we've been doing some early pilots, and I think it's incredibly exciting. We're seeing things like in our K-3 intervention work that motivation matters, which of course that's not surprising at all. But we've seen it matters differently for English language learners than for kids who are native English speakers. And in fact, this is a teeny little pilot, so we're going to see if this holds when we do the larger studies. But in fact, the English language learners were able to read at a much higher level than their kind of diagnosed level by having content-rich materials that they were really interested in. So like reading about polar bears versus grizzly bears, who's going to win? And that was a really interesting and motivating topic as opposed to things that are kind of out of context. And so that was exciting to see. We're also seeing some really interesting early stuff around adult capacity building and what does it look like to put adults in a virtual environment and help them practice skills with virtual kids instead of on real kids. How does that help adults be maybe not even more vulnerable, but just see things they couldn't otherwise see in their own practice, and how does that shape how we think about our own practice? That's just a couple of examples.
And we had this conversation earlier, and you said that this will give them an opportunity to practice again and not have to worry about having damaged a real child or something like that, right?
Right. I think of it as a kind of do no harm as medical professionals have. Like if I could do over some of my own teaching and had an opportunity to say, let me practice this on some virtual kids a few times and get good at it instead of I got my 7th graders this year, and I'm going to try it on my 7th graders next year, and my 7th graders the year after. What if I could practice several times in a row and learn from that practice very quickly, probably with the support of somebody else too.
Right. Really interesting stuff. So in an earlier conversation, you had talked about a couple of shifts that you're seeing in the K-12 kind of system nationally. Can you share with our audience some of the things you've observed recently?
I mean, I think there's all sorts of interesting things going on. One of them, I would say, is in the move from no child left behind to every student succeeds. There's this sense that, test scores didn't help us as much as we thought they might have. And kind of even though all along we educators were saying, of course kids are more than a single test score, of course that's not enough. And all the fancy psychometricians were saying you should never make a decision based on one data point, all that stuff. A lot of our policies and accountability systems were built around those annual state test scores. So I think we've learned a lot since then and said, well, those are useful for pointing out growth over time, perhaps, or for at the group level, how people are learning, but it's not that helpful for actually adjusting our instruction. So we need other kinds of data, and we need to pay attention to some other things, not just academic skills. So one of the things I think that's exciting in the field right now is that there's a lot more attention to social emotional well-being, not just because that's important generally from human beings, but also because it's connected to learning. We've learned a lot about what kinds of social emotional wellness one needs to be able to learn well, and how to help kids with that. And there's more and more work being done on, well, how would we measure it? And some people say, we shouldn't measure it. It's going to turn into a test score. Other people saying, well, no, but if we can't measure it at all, how are we going to know whether we're making progress? And so can we develop measures that don't turn into all the negative things that we had about test scores, but actually do help us learn if we're making progress? So I think both that shift of focus and the kind of shift in trying to have multiple measures about how kids are doing is a good shift. I think there's also some interest in what is broadly called personalized learning. It's one of these things that's almost becoming so much of a fad that it might get in its own way. But I think intuitively personalized learning makes sense to people even when they don't share the same definition, which is just essentially, can we meet kids where they are and get them what they need? That's how I think about it. And you can have much fancier definitions than that, but what if we actually could do that? And you'd have to pretty radically change the way we've done schooling for the last 100 plus years to do that. But more and more pockets of places are trying to do that. And I think over the next 15 to 20 years, if we got really serious about trying to really understand who are these children in front of us, what are their strengths, what are their needs, and how can we help each of them grow, there's huge potential in that. And I think it's going to require us to reimagine some roles, reimagine systems, and those kinds of things. But I'm excited about the direction of that.
It's almost like instead of creating a system and expecting the students to fit in, it's doing the opposite, seeing where the students are, what can we create to better support their learning. And I think you've mentioned that's called the future schooling, or how do you think about?
Well, I like to call it the future of learning.
First, future of learning.
But you could also think about it as the future of schooling. But one of the ways of thinking about the future of learning is to say, maybe it's not all about schooling. One of the things we know now is some kids do more learning outside of school than inside of school. Kids spend more time outside of school than inside of school. So it's not super surprising that they would learn more outside of school. But if you ask kids or you track kids learning, they'll say, well, all my favorite learning is outside of school. And so I think the question is, maybe school has more fluid boundaries with the community down the road. But even if you sort of thought, we're going to keep schools, could we change what's happening within them? So even something as not simple, but as concrete as, I have a first grade daughter. So instead of there being 3 first grade classrooms in her school, what if those teachers were together responsible for the 60 or so students they served? And what if the walls moved around? And what if the teachers and the special educators who work with them and the teachers' aides, what if we thought about it, well, gosh, we have about 6 adults who across them could help these 60 children. And what if we deployed them differently at different times of day? And we did that in first grade and not waited till middle school to think about kids having multiple kinds of teachers. And then you wouldn't be so dependent on fit, right? Right now it's so dependent on, does my child fit with the teacher she or he gets? Because that's just one example. And then of course you have to look at what we're actually asking the kids to do. It's not enough just to kind of regroup them, right? But there are things like that even within current school, I think you could change the kind of learning that we have.
I see. And I know you also mentioned that another kind of topic that's really gained some resonance across the country is this idea about equity and how do we kind of operationalize it. Can you say more about that?
Sure. I mean, I actually think of the 3 things I've mentioned, whether it's future of learning, personalized learning, or whether you talk about social emotional, I'm most excited, I think, about the changes in the conversations around equity. And I'm most excited when all 3 of those things are talked about together. But I think where we've moved as a field in the last, I would say 5 years or so, is from only a few people really talking about equity at the organizational level. People have been talking about it for a long time at the individual level, but at the organizational level, not that many conversations going on, to equity being a very frequent topic of conversation across lots of different kinds of education organizations. The trouble we're having now is everybody's talking about it and most people aren't doing much about it. And I don't think it's a lack of commitment to equity. I think what it is people don't know how to do it. The systems we've got are wired to produce the results we've got, which are inequitable. So in order to have more equitable outcomes, we're going to have to actually transform the systems we've got. We're going to have to be able to see and name how the systems we've got produce the inequities we've got. And then we have to figure out what are we going to do about it. So we can't just sit around and talk about inequity. We have to, at the school level, think about things like, well, what does our schedule look like? Where are all of the kids? It's very frequent for kids who are diagnosed with different things to be in the basement classrooms or the very closet-like classrooms. Okay, well, what is that? What message is that sending? So when we look at the very concrete ways we organize school, the way we hire, all of those things, what does it look like to make real what our heart tells us is the right thing to do?
So, the Leadership Institute is about supporting teacher leaders and principals and administrators. What advice did you have to your students this time when you came to Las Vegas?
Oh, well, I gave them so much advice. Hopefully they were able to follow one piece of it. But I just finished up teaching both teacher leader groups, and when they were kind of saying what some of their takeaways were, one of the ones they just said this afternoon was, I liked how you talked about moving things to the right. And basically my idea there was, it's less important to say whether things are good or bad right now, or whether we like them or we don't like them, how they are. What's most important is to say, where are we? And what would it look like to move things to the right? Just a little bit. Let's just try to improve from where we are. And rather than think, here's where we're trying to get to, it looks really far away from where we are. We have to do one giant leap from where we are now to where we're trying to get. What if you could just figure out, well, how would I make this meeting a little bit better next time? How would I make this task a little more rigorous for students? How do we keep every day trying to move a little bit to the right? So that was an idea that was resonant for people. Another idea that was resonant for people was focus on the tasks that we ask students to do. Because most kids on most days will try to do what we ask them to do. So what we ask them to do matters. And there was a lot of conversation about, are we asking them to do grade level things? Or are we asking them to do something that's 2 or 3 grade levels below what they are? So I think those two ideas were pretty resonant with folks.
Well, the first you mentioned certainly resonated with me in terms of the learning I had when I was your student, in terms of you getting all these kind of innovative approaches to the work, and then you get into it and you have to kind of calibrate expectations and what's possible and what's doable in the short term. And so that certainly resonates with me as well in this work as well.
Yeah, I think one of the things we talked about the last few days I've been here with the teacher leaders is think big, act small, which I think is another version of what you just said. Think big, act small is saying, yeah, keep the big idea in mind, or keep the big problem you're trying to solve in mind, but you can't tackle it all at once, or you can't reach that aspiration all at once. So you have to choose something small and actionable that's in the context of that big.
But that also keeps people motivated, right? So they don't get frustrated, like it's too big, why even try? We're creating all these new initiatives. So yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Is there anything else you want to leave our audience with? I don't think so. I think what I've been struck by while I've been here is how hard people work, and especially when you're towards the end of the school year, how easy it is to get overwhelmed by the distance between where we are and where we want to be. And that part of what we can do for each other is remind people of the unbelievable potential of all of our children, and help each other keep finding those small successes that then we can build on for the great successes our kids deserve. I think that's a great way to end. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks for having me.